Hello, everyone. So today is July the 8th. Um, I'm recording another astrology video, this time on the full moon in Capricorn, which is happening a couple days from now. Um, you know, I'm I have to admit, first of all, for a long time, counterintuitively, I wasn't making lunation videos. Part of the reason for this is because I tend to like to just focus more on the the more minute details of the aspects, and there's something about the way that most full moon moon videos tend to go that I find gets kind of repetitive, in that it's always about things coming to fruition or letting go of things or all this kind of stuff. Or I don't know. There's also this. I have to admit, the moon is a very important element of astrology. Some would say it could even be the most important, factor to consider, right? And there's a lot of things that I was focusing on in my other videos, such as the ingress, some major outer planet ingresses that have been happening, such as Uranus into Gemini, big one that happened just the other day. Um, Jupiter ingress into Cancer, where it's exalted now. And we also have a Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries. And what's interesting about this full moon is that the full moon Capricorn is the opposite sign from Cancer, and as such, this full moon will be illuminated by the glow of this Jupiter in Cancer with the sun in Cancer. And however, there's a bit of it's kind of, you got the opposite thing, right? My last video that I made, I was kind of like riffing, not my last video, but my last, what can I say? My last lunation video that I did, I was riffing on the dynamic with Cancer. And it was interesting because there's this recurring thing about like gender issues or the gender polarity, or how I'm personally, just to say it bluntly, I'm a little bit disappointed in the way that the whole this whole world of what you would say archetypal the archetypes, the divine masculine, the divine feminine. It's basically, if I'm creating on the internet, I'm like coming up, I'm rubbing up against the sorry state of what is the Jungian archetypal kind of scene. It's pretty weak a lot of the time, right? And maybe I'm just naive by thinking this is an opportunity to do something better, right? Maybe this is just my foolish naivety that I'm thinking, like there's so much awful stuff out there that it should be fairly easy just to improve it a little bit, right? Maybe I'm biting off more than I can chew, right? But there's like an example of this is like there's the polarity, right? Where oftentimes you've got Cancer, which is clearly with astrology is associated with mother. The body part it rules is the breasts, and it has to do. There's all the stuff to do with babies and children and breastfeeding and creating a nurturing home environment. All this kind of stuff goes with the sentimentality of childhood and family, and all this goes with Cancer, right? No arguing that. Now, in opposite to that, people often would be like, oh, well, so if you have this one thing that stands for that, the opposite obviously has to do with a father, the hardworking male father figure who's the breadwinner for the mother who stays home and breastfeeds. But what's interesting is that the way that astrology works, when you have full moons, the opposite is actually also feminine, right? And here we have Capricorn, the sea goat. It's also funny because sometimes people like use Capricorn to talk about a mountain goat that's really inspired to climb the mountain and all this kind of stuff, because it's like, or the light, right? The darkest part of the year, and the goat wants to climb up to the top of the mountain, which does, I suppose it works. But the actual image of Capricorn is a sea goat, which is like a mermaid goat, which ain't doing any climbing, right? It's more like diving to the bottom of the sea. There's not going to be much climbing going on there, right? And there's something, I think there's a sort of like tendency though, that if you understand the social context in what a lot of this is happening, there's a lot of like, I feel inclined to like, you know, there's this thing where like Saturn being something that's structure, about rules, about boundaries, about order, and all this kind of stuff, that tends to lends itself to this idea of having a certain structure and discipline that facilitates a kind of like hard-working, disciplined kind of dynamic, right? This is why Mars is said to exalt in Capricorn, because it's like gives sort of structure and rules and discipline to follow, for so which you can apply yourself in a grounded and practical and pragmatic, way, right? But the thing about this is that Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn right now, is in the first decan of Aries conjunct with Neptune, and this tends to, so it's like you're the moon in a place which the moon also doesn't do very well in Capricorn, because the moon is more at home in the sensitive, nurturing part of the, with Cancer. The full moon is its opposite, which is also a feminine sign, but has more to do with the earthiness, the groundedness of the or fertility, maybe even, right? Rather than but it often kind of gets played into this thing where it's like, we don't want to amplify this sort of like, earthy, kind of, Mother Earth kind of stuff. Instead, we want to make it like a guy in a suit who's like the Wall Street, like Wolf on Wall Street, who's just going to like make tons of money by exploiting the environment. And that's going to be our Capricorn, right? And he's a little bit naughty. He's got the devil horns. He's like, oh, I know how to really, drill, baby, drill. We'll really exploit the resources on this one, right? And that's kind of like, so, and we'll be really hardworking. We'll put, like the boss man who really gets you to shell it, make that money, right? That, this, if you're going to try to like, you make content that gets popular, you're going to want to play up that side of it, right? But what's interesting about, I think there's this thing, first of all, that you've got Saturn conjunct Neptune, which I think it's hard. The Neptune often, if you read Liz Green's book on Neptune, they talk about the acceptance of the mother who accepts and who has like the motherly love, unconditional motherly love, and Saturn in the sign of Aries in its fall. There's a certain kind of maturity. Maybe a strict father figure is mature and sets rules, but the mother is too unconditionally loving and supportive, and then there's also this kind of quality of like the other side of being disciplined and hardworking is being perhaps lazy, inactive, idle, and maybe if you were like, I guess the important thing to remember here is that even if you get out of the sort of Protestant work ethic thing, even if you're like a Buddhist, they say, whatever, after enlightenment, you chop wood, carry water, right? That like the basic truth of living and the demands, your responsibilities are still there afterwards or whatever. But I think there is this sort of thing that Saturn could also just stands with getting older, old age, being kind of, that could stand for, the boringness of old age, getting older, not doing as much, being kind of lazy, all that kind of stuff, versus the pressure on you in youth to, make yourself a productive member of society, right? And I think, I'm just, one of the challenges, or whatever, one of the things that I'm working with here is that since COVID, I've moved back in with my family. My mother is a widow. We no longer have my father here around as a strong, supportive father figure to influence the family. And my mother is getting older and older and older. And I suppose, like, rather than feeling like it's my job to stay here and look after her, I could get really productive in terms of, well, I don't know if astrology is the best way to do it. Maybe I need to like think of some other business ideas. But if I, got my grind and my hustle really going, then, I could, rather than stuck here, I could have an expensive, I could be like living in Yale Town or something, right? I could have like a Yale Town condo. I could be making so much money. I could like pay for, maids and, caregivers and a whole team of people to look after my mother in the suburbs while I'm living the high life as like an astrology superstar in Yale Town, just living it up, right? Living the dream. And it's not my job to be my personal like servant to my family or something like that, but that's the dream of like making money as a businessman, right? Like of being a hardworking, I work hard, so that means that I can hire a bunch of hardworking servant people to look after my family, so I don't have to do, unglamorous menial work like like doing the dishes or like scrubbing the floors, or I can focus on my dreams, or So, anyways, with that in mind, I don't know. There's also the certain thing that like I also have to realize that like I'm, if I'm creating this astrology content, that most people may be too busy to focus on things like James Hillman, right? This book is called the Puer and Senex, from the James Hillman Uniform collection, and I have had this book. I got this book in the middle of the pandemic, and I haven't finished reading it yet. However, one of the chapters that I have finished reading is this one on the Great Mother archetype, right? And I thought that since with this kind of lead up that I'm going into it, and the idea that considering that we're dealing with the Sun and Jupiter in Cancer, the full moon in Capricorn, the ruler of Capricorn being Saturn in Aries, conjunct with Neptune, which I believe is very resonant with both the Senex as well as the mother archetype. And I've also just introduced this whole dynamic where part of my family situation is that my mother's a widow, and I have a missing father and a mother that needs to be cared for, and all this kind of stuff. And these kinds of the demand, also the expectation to be a hardworking, hardworking man and a pillar of support for our society. You know what I'm trying to say? Not just like a lazy slacker, right? With all this kind of stuff going into it, I'm going to read James Hillman as a special treat for you people who may be too busy to just pour hours and hours and hours into researching and stuff like this. I'm taking the good bits and I'm gonna make them available for you. Okay, I'm gonna have a sip of coffee. Just get ready to read this. All right, James Hillman on the Great Mother archetype. When the father is absent, we fall more readily into the arms of the mother. And indeed, the father is missing. God is dead. We cannot go backward by propping up Senex religion. The missing father is not your or my personal father. He is the absent father of our culture, the viable Senex, who provides not daily bread, but spirit through meaning and order. The missing father is the dead God who offered a focus for spiritual things. Unable to go backward to revive the dead father of tradition, we go downward into the mothers of the collective unconscious, seeking an all-embracing comprehension. We ask for help in getting through the narrow straits without harm. The sun wants invulnerability. Grant us protection, foreknowledge, cherish us. Our prayer is to the night for a dream, to a love for understanding, to a little rite or exercise for a moment of wisdom. Above all, we want assurance through a vision beforehand that it will all come out all right. Here is the motive of protection again, and a protection of a specific sort. Invulnerability, foresight, guarantee that all shall be well no matter what. Just here we catch one glimpse of a difference between Puer and son. Existential guarantees are given by mothers. Loyalty to her gives her loyalty in return. She won't let you down if you remain loyal to her. Mother assures safety and gives life, but mother does not give true spirit that comes from uncertainty, risk, failure, aspects of the puer. The son does not need the father, whereas the puer seeks recognition from the father, a recognition of spirit by spirit that leads to eventual fatherhood in the puer itself. As we cannot get to the father through the mother, so we cannot get to the hot sperm seed of logos through its imitations in moon magic. Psychology is not dissolution into psychic magic. Psychology is a logos of the psyche. It requires spirit. Psychology advances not only through philosophies of the mother, evolution in growth and development, naturalism, materialism, the social adaptation of a feeling-loaded humanism, comparisons with the animal realm, reductions to emotional simplicities like love, sexuality, and aggression. Psychology requires other patterns for advancing its thought and other archetypal carriers, such as Puer, which might liberate psychology's speculative fantasy and insist upon psychology's spiritual significance. Without the Father, we lose also the capacity which the Church recognized as discrimination of the spirits, the ability to know a call when we hear one, and to discriminate between the voices, an activity so necessary for precise psychology of the unconscious. But the spirit that has no father has no guide for such niceties. The Senex Puer division puts an end to spiritual discrimination. Instead, we have a promiscuity of spirits, astrology, yoga, spiritual philosophy, cybernetics, atomic physics, Jungianism, etc., all enjoyed currently, and the indiscrimination among them of an all-understanding mother. The mother encourages her son, go ahead, embrace it all. For her, all equals everything. The father's instruction, on the contrary, is all equals nothing unless the all be precisely discriminated. The realm of the great goddess is characterized by the passive inertia and compulsive dynamis of nature, the protective, nourishing, generative cycle in animal and plant from seed to death, an affinity for beauty, timelessness, and emotionality. A preference for opacity, obscurity, coagulation, and darkness, a mystique of the blood per se or in kinship ties. All these areas under the domination of the great goddess, with but a slight shift of emphasis towards the spiritual, could as well be reflected by the puer. Thus, the puer impulse is exaggerated by the mother complex. A contamination of any two archetypes may reinforce them both, or it may depotentiate one in favor of the other. In the special case of the mother-puer confluence, the mother seems to win out not only by depotentiating spirit, but by exaggerating it. Mother, as giver and nourisher, as natural life itself, supplies the puer with an overdose of energetic supplies, and by reinforcing certain of the puer's basic traits, she claims him as her dependent son. When the mother gets hold of these traits, she draws them in extreme. The puer pensiveness becomes an ineffectual daydream. Death becomes no longer a terror, but a welcomed and natural comfort. Laming, instead of an opening into human vulnerability, is turned exaggeratedly by mother into castration, a paralysis, a suicide. The vertical flights, so authentic to the root of the puer, become instead a contemptuous soaring over a corrupt and shoddy world. The family problem takes on a religious mystique. All family members, personages in a matriarchal epic. Then, too, eternity, instead of being an aspect of events and the way in which puer consciousness perceives through to archetypal significance, is distorted into a disregard for time, even a denial for all temporal things. Or a materialistic opportunism appears instead of the genuine Puer sense of opportunity. Its way of proceeding by hunch and luck, its ambition carried by play and mercurius. There is materialism, too, in a particular concretism of metaphysical ideas. They must be put in force, acted out in body and clothes and community. In ethics, in sexuality, money, diet, as the mother's matter repressed returns in the literalizations of Puer abstractions. The cycle of nature in which the Puer consciousness is a field out of which to draw metaphors, to make jokes upon, play an experiment with, in sun consciousness becomes a pious nature out there, a shack in the woods, soiled clothes, hatha yoga, beauty, which the Puer reflects Platonic ideals and has a revelation of the essence of value, narrows instead into the vanities of my own image, my own aesthetic productions and sensitivities. The close associations of mother and son in the psyche imaged as incest and experienced as ecstasy and guilt. The ecstasy goes in both vertical directions, divine and hellward, but the guilt is not assuaged. The great mother changes her Puer's debt to the transcendent, what he owes the gods for his gifts, into a debt of feeling, a guilt towards her symbols in the round of material life. He overpays society in family, job, civic duties, and avoids his destiny. Through her, his relation with material life oscillates between ecstatic springing of its binds or guilty submission to them. In the sexual sphere, psychoanalysts have called this oscillation the continual back and forth between lust and guilt, guilt and lust. The ecstatic aspect in a man, carried by the conjoined archetype of mother-son, takes him yet further from the father's inhibitions of order and limit. Ecstasy is one of the goddess's ways of seducing the Puer from its Senex connection. By overcoming limit, Puer consciousness feels itself overcoming fate, which sets it and is limit. Rather than loving fate or being driven by it, the Puer escapes from fate in magical, ecstatic flight. The Puer aspirations are fed with new fuel, the potent combustible of sexual and power drives whose source is in the instinctual domain of the great goddess. These exaggerations of the Puer impulse set him afire. He is the torch, the arrow, and the wing. Aphrodite's son Eros. He seems able to realize his sexual life and his career, every wish of his childhood's omnipotence fantasies. It's all coming true. His being is a magic phallus, glowing and strong, every act inspired, every word pregnant with deep natural wisdom. The great goddess behind the scenes has handed him his ecstatic wand. She governs both the animal desire and the horizontal world of matter, over which she offers promise of conquest. Due to the emotionality of the Great Mother, the dynamis of the Son is unusually labile, unusually dependent upon emotion. Inspiration can no longer be differentiated from enthusiasm, the correct and necessary ascension from ecstasy. The fire flares up and then all but goes out, damp and smoky, clouding vision and afflicting others with the noxious air of bad moods. The dependence of spirit upon mood, described in vertical language, heights and depths, glory and despair, has its archetypal counterpart in the festivals for Attis, Sibyl's son, which were called Hilaria and Tristia. When the vertical direction toward transcendence is misdirected through the Great Mother, the Puer is no longer authentic. He takes his rule now from the relationship with the feminine. Ecstasy and guilt are two parts of the pattern of sonship. Even more important is heroism. Whether as the hero lover or the hero hermit denying matter but with an ear to nature's breast, or the hero conqueror who slays some slimy dragon of public evil, or as Balder, so perfect and so unable to staunch the bleeding from his beautiful wounds, Puer has lost its freedom. Direct access to the spirit is no longer there. It requires drama, tragedy, heroics. Life becomes a performance acted out through a role in the relationship with the eternal feminine who stands behind every son, martyr, messiah, devotee, hero, lover. By playing these roles, we are part of the cult of the great goddess. Our identities are given by the enactment of these roles, and thus we become her sons, since our life depends on the roles she gives. She thus can reflect even the way that the Puer seeks the Senex, exaggerating the discipleship of the student to his master, the swagger of the battler with the old order, the exclusivity of the Messiah, whose new truth refuses everything that has gone before. The mother complex dulls the precision of the spirit. Issues become quickly either or, since the great goddess does not have much comprehension of the spirit. She only grasps it in relationship to her, that is, the mother complex must make of the spirit something related. It must have effects in the realm of matter, life, world, people. This sounds only human and full of common sense. Again, terms too often expressing the sentimentalism of the mother complex. Even should a man recognize the mother in his actions and take flight from her relatedness into lofty abstraction and vast impersonal fantasy, he is still the son filled with the animus of the goddess, her pneuma, her breath and wind, and he serves her best by making such divisions between his light and her darkness, his spirit and her matter, between his world and hers. This is the animus thinking of sonship, found as much in men as women. It is a thinking of coagulation and oppositions between them, rather than a thinking in distinctions between perspectives. For it is not that the mother is this or that, or that the puer this or that, as describable objects, things, but rather that the mother and the puer are ways of perceiving. More or less the same facts can be found in Puer and in the mother's son, so that the real difference between them lies in the way in which we perceive these facts. But the mother does not want to be seen through. She throws up her veils of darkness, her opacity and emotionality, and represents crude, materialized divisions between God and Caesar, this world and the next, time and eternity, sacred and profane, introvert and extrovert, and so on ad infinitum, keeping her animus son eternally occupied, preventing his need for an eternality of another sort. This eternality of the puer would see through all such opposites in terms of their fundamental likeness as a way of thought. The movement from the sun to puer, that is, the movement of the restoration of the original puer vision, occurs when one sees through the challenge of the opposites that the great goddess embroils us in, so that one can refuse to do battle with her in the field of her entangling dilemmas. By this, I do not mean that the Puer vision is that of a Nietzschean Superman beyond good and evil. Rather, I mean that the Puer vision, because of its inherent connection with the Senex, can live with this field as the field of necessity, simply by seeing through to that ambiguity, which is the identity of opposites. There is no need either to force choices, as does the hero's son, or to make a theology of conflict in the fashion of the priest's son. The Puer vision is transcendent and beyond, in the sense that it is not caught in her literal animus game. Therefore, the Puer consciousness does not have to be literally transcendent, leave the scene, cut out, blow. Now, hold on. I'm going to read a bit more. I'm just going to read this without too much commentary, because just to not spend too much time on it. But I will point out it's interesting because in the next passage, there is going to be a reference to Hillman referencing Gurdjieff, which was one of the few kind of intersection points of, different characters I'm spent some time learning about Gurdjieff, but prior to that, I was really into Hillman. I think I'm surprised that so many people want to start Gurdjieff groups, but people aren't interested in starting a Hillman group, right? Why not start a Hillman group, right? I'm kind of, I think Hillman's maybe a bit more my vibe, but, I don't see them as fundamentally opposite or anything, right? Anyways. There is also the anti-hero or hero in reverse, who is another Puer substitute. Another form of the Great Mother's son. He lives in her lap and off the lap of the land. Rather than all phallus, he is all castration, weak, gentle, yielding to life and its blows. He chooses to lose, and his is the soft answer to wrath, which spirit he is unable to meet without the Father. His way follows nature, the path of least resistance, eventually into the primeval swamp, bogged. He, like water, he flows downward, slips out of sight, and has effects underground, so like water that he evokes the divine child in the water rushes. But this son is not separated from the water by cradle, basket, boat. He is the water. He gives the illusion of being on the right way, winding around the obstacles as the Tao called water and child, but unlike Icarus, he does not plunge into the water vertically, nor does he serve Olympian archetypal principles with wet enthusiasm, as does Ganymede the cupbearer. He just goes along with what's going, a stream slipping through the great body of Mother Nature, ending ultimately in the amniotic estuary, streaming into oceanic bliss. Whether hyperactive with theatrics or ecstasies, or passive with the flow of energy, results from the mother archetype. The antihero attempts to resolve the Puer complex through the degradation of energy. The individual follows along, letting things happen, dropping out from the demands put upon the heroic ego. He makes few demands even on himself, wanting little and needing less and less. As tensions equalize, he believes himself in rare balance, becoming cooler and less personal. His images and ideas become more archetypal, reflecting universal levels of the collective unconscious. Because there appears to be spiritual advance in visual, poetic, and metaphysical ideas, the term regression is refused as a misnomer. Regression means return to a more childish or historically earlier behavior patterns, but the passive son seems so obviously to be making spiritual advancement towards ever-widening values and general symbols, progressing through the perennial philosophy into truths of all religions, even if requiring sometimes financial support or hallucinogenic reinforcement. One can hardly be regressing while quoting Hess, Don Juan, Gurdjieff, Tagore, Eckhart, Merton, and Socrates. The philosophy, however, has a defensive note, providing a wraparound shield against heroics, will, and effort. For example, the anti-heroics of Ramakrishna. The nearer you get to God, the less he gives you to do. These traits and the predictable pattern of the anti-hero, what he will do, read, or say next, disclose that in his spiritual progress he is actually following the degradation of energy in its entropic direction, which is, in another language, as Freud pointed out, nirvana, or death. An entropy in a system is characterized by cooling and running down, by increase of statistical probability, equalization of tension, generalization, randomness, degradation from higher to lower descriptions of energy, and increasing disorder. All this happens in individual behavior, as well as the behavior of any complex when it gives up. Although the theme of giving up belongs to in another chapter, we may note a difference between the Puer and the hero or anti-hero in this respect. The Puer gives up because of an inadequate survival sense. Separated from the Senex, it does not know how to defend itself or keep itself in order. The hero-anti-hero gives up owing to the mother. It would free psychic energy by getting rid of the complex altogether. But as Jung points out, complexes are the mother of psychic energy. So to conquer them, to overcome them, to cure oneself of them is another way of trying to rid oneself of the mother. Puer and hero also differ in their self-destructiveness. The Puer is self-destructive because it lacks psyche, containment, reflection, involvement. And it lacks, when separated from the Senex, the ability to father itself, to put a roof over its head and a wall around its property. The self-destructiveness of the Puer in any complex arises because the complex does not understand itself. It sees, it knows, it makes, but it does not see or know or make itself. There is an absence of psychic reflection of the spirit and an absence of spiritual realization in the psyche. The hero is self-destructive because it would have done with the complex, and this may occur in various ways. It may appear as eros, idealism, the inspiration of transforming the complexes into wholeness. It may appear as anti-heroic cooling of the complexes, depotentiating everything of tension, or its reverse, burning everything up in enthusiasm. It may appear as the cure of loving acceptance, which is also a death wish, revealing how close Eros and Thanatos are to each other. For to be healed and to be made whole by love, or to give up the tension by death, are close indeed. Both refuse the complex as the fundamental necessity of psychic life, the only cure for which is death. Death alone puts an end to the complexes, which are normal phenomena of life, and, like the mother, are the fundament of each individual's existence. We are complex beings, and human nature is a composition of complexities. Without complexes, there is no living reality, only a transcendent nirvana, or the Buddha, whose last supposed words point to the complexity of the psyche as life's primary given. Decay is inherent in all composite things. Work your salvation with diligence. Getting rid of and giving up this complexity through any formula for overcoming opposites, or dropping out, or curing, misses the psychic reality. Psychological therapy is less an overcoming and a getting rid than it is a decay or decomposing. The way in which we are composed. This is what the alchemists called the putrefactio. The slow time process of transformation through affliction, wastage, and moral horror. Sound familiar? Both heroic getting rid and passive giving up attempt to speed decay and have done with it, but they would avoid the work of the psychic reality by escape into the spiritual salvation. But the cure is the decay. When the puer lives authentically to its structure, there is a smell of decadence, a fond attachment to one's mess, which is the part of its resistance to analysis. In this sense, the puer, seemingly so quick and flame-like, is slow to change, shows no development, seems forever stuck in the same old dirty habits. His putrefaction in his intractable symptoms of colon and digestion, of eczema and acne, or of piles, in his long, slow colds of sinuses, his chronic genital complaints, his money peculiarities, or his low-life fascinations. These things analysis has wrongly attributed to the shadow repression owing to the mother complex. He is bound to the mother in compensatory materialistic way and cannot fight free. But against this the background of decay, slowness, and the dirt in the puer can be seen as a way of following the path of putrefaction towards finding the outcast Senex. As such, it is a digestive, fermentive process that should not be heroically hurried. I think this really goes well with the Saturn and Neptune. Like, think about like the Neptune being like an intoxicating beverage that you're gonna like. In Saturn, it takes time, and we're gonna let this thing, we're gonna bottle it. We're going to let it ferment. We're going to let it eat the sugar. We're going to let it turn into, but we can't, if you're impatient, you're going to have to wait. You can't wait until it's done fermenting, but you're going to have to do something else to keep yourself busy, right? Nor should rot be forcibly rubbed in as a treatment to integrate the shadow. The puer is not a dog. The puer consciousness needs not housebreaking and healing, but a new attunement of his sensitivity to the odors of his own decay. His individuation is in the pathologizing process itself and not in his heroic efforts to overcome. We can anyway not rid ourselves of complexes until they have given us up. Their decaying time is longer than life of the individual personality, since they continue in a kind of autonomous existence long after we have left the scene. They are part of the psychic inheritance of our children, and their children, both natural and spiritual. The complexes are our dosage of sin, our karma, which, if given up, is really only passed on elsewhere. In the analysis of those men called Puer, one needs a nose for decay, for waste, for moldering ruin. By nursing the mess along, we keep the Puer alive and in touch with the prima materia. By whitewashing with bland acceptance, giving up, or by hurrying the process to get going, getting rid, we put the authentic spirit into the old bottle marked mother. Now, I don't know. There's a lot there. I don't really know if I'm going to be getting into it in a very deep critical analysis. I'm probably just going to leave you with that to consider it. But I think one of the thing that stands out for me is this idea of the decay, right? Or the gradual decline. And you also may have noticed that I guess I didn't talk about, I'm not talking about all these disasters that have been going on. Well, I guess I'll mention it, the floods in Texas, or there's another apparently earthquake in Japan, or I don't know, there's lots of stuff going on. There's lots of political stuff going on. There's a sense that everything's getting worse, that everything is just going to shit. There's a certain kind of, some people may attribute such a dynamic to something like maybe like the Kali Yuga, right? In trying to watch other astrologers' videos, I see other astrologers talk about things like, oh, we're reaching the end of the Kali Yuga. It's all going to turn around and everything's going to get better. I personally am skeptical about this, and I'm also skeptical about trying to, come up with an astrological theory to prove some kind of overly optimistic idea like this. I think it's more accurate to say, especially if you think about the age of, regardless of how serious you take the age of Aquarius, if you take the age of Aquarius seriously, the idea about these astrological ages of the precessions of the equinoxes is we're going from Aries to Pisces to Aquarius, and then after that it's Capricorn, right? And to me, this seems to me to be like, it's like going backwards from spring into the darkest time of the year. And I think that this kind of goes with a sense of this gradual decomposition this going back to the earth, going back to matter. And I think right now what we're seeing is a lot of sort of heroic Yang-y resistance to that, right? The whole idea of Elon Musk and all these tech bros is this kind of like phallic yang resistance to the gradual decay of our civilization. And you hear all these rhetorical language of protecting humanity, protecting civilization, or that kind of stuff. But it really is this kind of the dark feminine of the Kali Yuga, right? I think that there's something about the full moon Capricorn ruled over by Saturn and Neptune and Aries that feels like there's this sort of like, Saturn and Neptune and Aries, Saturn has fallen Aries. There's the youth, the Puer and the Senex, right? The Puer is the eternal youth, the Peter Pan, who creates a fantasy, a dream for some heroic way to overcome the eventual decay or collapse or whatever. But then there is or come up with a story like, oh, don't worry everybody, we'll get all hopeful because the Kali Yuga, this is just going to turn around and everything's going to get better, right? But then there is something that is obviously, there's also this sort of attitude of trying to accept that giving up, in the way that, oftentimes, when they talk about Buddhists reaching nirvana, they talk about a flame being snuffed out, right? An extinguishing, or a kind of like or like there's this whole, even Carl Jung talked about this sort of dynamic, the hero must die, right? That there is like, but then there's, is that by if you're too wrapped up in the sort of surrendering, giving oneself over, are you captured by this divine feminine of like going back to earth archetype, and you're missing the Senex, the old man who is going to try to set some rules and set some order, set some discipline to try to help, rather than just giving up, being lending some energy to the process of self-creation, right? Where it's not just giving up and decomposing and life's all for nothing, that there is actually an opportunity to creatively work with the situation, right? In a more, I don't know. And I also just have to admit that part of this dynamic is that I have to credit Adam Ellenboss for getting me into James Hillman, because prior to getting into Adam Ellenboss, I had no idea who James Hillman was. And I just have to, I'm just doing my best. Part of my approach to this is that I have difficulty being motivated to invest my creative energies into something that's not inherently interesting and exciting to me. And there was a video that I watched, which was like a collaboration with some people, and a lot of people were emphasizing this full moon in Capricorn being basically just kind of like a quiet, boring time, and it's like, for me, I'm just kind of like, that's part of the reason why I like, taking, if I find different courses to take or different things to learn about, or, if I want to be like, what am I going to put my time and energy into? It's like, there's so much, I don't know. I don't know about you guys, but I went through a period of time, I went through some kind of a change where there's like a lot of, of course life is boring, right? Of course, maybe this is it. Maybe that, if you're maybe for a lot of people, life isn't always an exciting. It could also, like, the Krishnamurti had this joke about, like, if you're getting into heaven is really easy, so long as you can put up with it just being boring, right? It's our desire, like, we make the world around us into some kind of a hell because we can't tolerate things being dull and boring and, falling apart or decaying. We need to have like some sort of heroic quest to make everything more interesting and more exciting, or to save, to find some sort of creative way to redeem the situation. And it's because of that, like, denial of the boring, the tedious, the mundane quality of life that we basically make life a living hell for the people around us, right? Because people just are like, why can't you just why can't you just be accepting of the life, even if it's boring, even if it's not interesting? No, you can't. You have to just go and you have to start some trouble. You have to start some shit just because you're bored, right? Like, and in that we end up in hell because we get captured by the archetypal complex. It's the archetypal conflicts creates this drama. It makes things interesting, and then we get drawn out by that. And before we know it, we've made a huge mess out of things, right? When we could have just accepted, things as they were, and lived in peace with that, right? And then but then the more we do that, the more we're caught by the all accepting mother, like the or what the New Agers say about, like, the unconditional love, right? Unconditional love for everything. And then you don't have to make life a living hell because you're seized by the archetypal dragon, and you have to go with your flaming sword on some sort of damn crusader holy quest to like Jordan Peterson or something like that, right? Okay. And I think if you can see, you can hear the Saturn Neptune in Aries, the fantasy of it all, and the Puer idealism, and the denial of boredom, or the resistance of it. Anyways, hopefully this is a good one for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this or got something out of it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. Keep on rocking the free world.